My son texted me. "I don't want you at my wedding. My girlfriend hates you." The text message sat on my phone screen like a knife to the heart. "Mom, don't bother showing up to the wedding. Jessica doesn't want you there. She says you'll just ruin everything." I stared at those words until they blurred, sitting in my car outside the jewelry store where I'd just picked up the custom wedding gift I'd spent 3 months saving for. My name is Nicole, I'm 72 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. That message from my son Marcus wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. Like 28 years of being his mother suddenly meant nothing because his fiancé decided I wasn't good enough for their special day. I'd worked as a school custodian my entire adult life. Not glamorous work, but honest work. Mopping floors, fixing broken desks, staying late to set up for parent meetings. I raised Marcus alone after his father walked out when he was only 3 years old. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I made sure he had clean clothes for school, helped with homework at our tiny kitchen table, celebrated every birthday even when money was so tight I had to choose between the electric bill and a cake. When he got accepted to college, I worked double shifts for 2 years to help with expenses. I was so proud watching him walk across that graduation stage. Then he met Jessica at his law firm. She came from money, the kind of money where people summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. From our first meeting, I could feel her looking down at me, the way her eyes scanned my discount store dress, how she barely touched my hand when we shook, the fake smile that never reached her eyes. Marcus didn't seem to notice, or maybe he chose not to. He was so in love, so eager to fit into her world. Slowly, the calls became less frequent. Our Sunday dinners turned into monthly obligations, then barely quarterly check-ins. I told myself it was normal, that he was building his own life, but deep down, I knew I was being pushed out. When Marcus announced the engagement 6 months ago, I was genuinely happy for him. I thought maybe this would bring us closer again. I started saving immediately, putting aside $40 here, $60 there from my pension checks. I skipped buying new winter boots even though mine had holes. I ate soup and crackers for dinner more nights than I cared to admit. Also, I could give them something special, something that showed how much I loved my son despite the distance growing between us. The gift I'd commissioned was a silver picture frame engraved with their wedding date and a quote about family. Inside, I'd placed a photo of Marcus as a little boy, the two of us laughing at the beach during our only real vacation. It cost me $800, nearly 3 months of careful saving. But sitting there in that parking lot, reading that cruel message over and over, something shifted inside me. My hands were shaking, not just from hurt, but from a rising anger I'd been suppressing for too long. I looked at the wrapped gift on my passenger seat, then back at my phone. Marcus had sent 3 more messages. "Mom, did you see my text?" Then, "Jessica is really stressed about the wedding. Just trying to keep things simple." And finally, "It's probably better this way." Better for who? I wondered. I picked up my phone and typed back a single sentence. "Understood. I wish you both well." Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I blocked my own son's number. I drove home in a daze, that wrapped gift still sitting on the seat beside me like evidence of my own foolishness. When I pulled into the driveway of my small ranch house, the same house where Marcus grew up, I didn't cry. I just sat there watching the sun drop behind my neighbor's roof, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful, indifferent nature carrying on while my world crumbled. I finally grabbed the gift and walked inside, setting it on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker that had been sputtering for 3 years, but still worked if you knew how to jiggle the handle just right. That gift sat there for 2 days, wrapped in expensive silver paper, mocking me every time I passed by. On the 3rd morning, I made a decision. I unwrapped that frame carefully, salvaging the paper because old habits die hard, and I looked at the photo inside. Marcus was maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned, his arms wrapped around my neck as waves crashed behind us. That trip to the coast had cost me an entire month's rent, money I didn't really have, but his smile in that moment had been worth every penny. I remembered thinking then that I would do anything for this child, sacrifice anything to see him happy. But looking at that photo now, I realized something painful and liberating at the same time. That little boy didn't exist anymore, and the man he'd become had made his choice. I called the jewelry store that afternoon. "Hello, this is Nicole Patterson. I purchased a custom frame from you last week, order number 4793. I need to know if I can return it." The woman on the phone was kind, professional. She explained their policy was no returns on custom items, but she could hear something in my voice. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" she asked gently. I almost broke down right there, but I swallowed hard and said, "I just won't be needing it after all." She paused, then offered something unexpected. We have a consignment section for custom pieces. Sometimes other customers love the designs. I could list it for you at 75% of what you paid. Would that help? I agreed immediately. $600 wouldn't erase the hurt, but it was better than staring at that frame every day. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at some fancy country club in the hills. I knew because Marcus had sent me the details months ago, back when I was still invited, back when I still mattered. That morning, I woke up early and made myself a proper breakfast, something I rarely did. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee in my favorite mug that said "World's Best Mom," a gift from Marcus when he was 12. I sat at my kitchen table eating slowly, deliberately, refusing to let this day defeat me. I'd already made plans. My friend Dorothy from church had invited me to help serve lunch at the community shelter, something I did occasionally but never on weekends. "We always need extra hands on Saturdays," she'd said when I called her. She didn't ask why I was suddenly available. Didn't pry. Just said, "We'd love to have you, Nicole." Serving food to people who genuinely needed help, seeing their grateful faces, hearing their stories, it put things in perspective. There was Robert, a veteran who'd lost his housing after medical bills piled up. There was Sandra with her 2 kids, recently escaped from an abusive situation. There was Tom, an older gentleman who'd worked construction for 40 years until his back gave out. Real struggles, real people fighting real battles, and here I was, heartbroken over a wedding invitation. It didn't erase my pain, but it reminded me that pain comes in many forms, and maybe mine wasn't the worst kind. Maybe I still had more than I realized. I got home that evening just as the sun was setting. Marcus's wedding would be over by now, the reception probably in full swing. I imagined him in his tuxedo, Jessica in whatever designer gown she'd chosen, their friends toasting to their future. I wondered if anyone had asked about me, if Marcus had to explain why his mother wasn't there, or if Jessica had successfully erased me from the narrative entirely. My phone was still off, Marcus's number still blocked. Part of me expected him to show up at my door, to apologize, to say it had all been a terrible mistake. But the evening passed quietly, just me and the television and the leftover casserole Dorothy had sent home with me. And in that quiet, I made myself a promise. I was done waiting for scraps of affection from someone who'd made it clear I wasn't wanted. Sunday morning arrived with rain pattering against my windows, the kind of steady Oregon drizzle that makes everything look gray and soft. I'd slept surprisingly well, probably exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the previous days. I made my coffee, settled into my worn armchair with the Sunday paper, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But around 10 in the morning, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Dorothy usually called first, and the mailman never came on Sundays. I approached the door cautiously and peeked through the peephole. Standing on my porch, soaked from the rain, was Marcus. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home. Let him stand there in the rain like I'd stood in the rain of his rejection. But something made me open the door. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that stubborn maternal instinct that doesn't die even when it should. He looked terrible. His hair was messy, his eyes red-rimmed, and he was still wearing his wedding suit, now wrinkled and damp. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking slightly. I stood in the doorway, not inviting him in, not speaking, just waiting. "Mom, I messed up. Can we talk?" he asked, and I could see his hands shaking. Not from cold, but from something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed to hear what could possibly justify what he'd done. He stood dripping in my entryway, the same entryway where I'd taken his first day of school photos, where I'd helped him pin on his prom boutonniere, where I'd hugged him goodbye when he left for college. "The wedding was yesterday," I said flatly, stating the obvious. "I know," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Jessica and we had a fight, a big one. Right after the ceremony, during the reception. She said something about you, something cruel, and I finally saw it. Really saw it. How she'd been poisoning me against you for months." He moved into my living room without being invited, sitting on the edge of my couch like he used to when he was a teenager in trouble. "She told me you were embarrassing, that you didn't fit with our social circle, that having you at the wedding would make her family uncomfortable. And I listened, Mom. I actually listened to that garbage and believed it mattered more than you did." His voice was thick with emotion, but I felt strangely detached, like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. "So what changed?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "What made you suddenly see the light at your own wedding reception?" Marcus ran his hands through his wet hair, a gesture I recognized from childhood when he was trying to find the right words. "Her father made a toast. He talked about family, about how important it is to honor the people who raised us, who sacrificed for us, and Jessica just rolled her eyes. Then her mother leaned over and said something about how glad she was you weren't there to lower the tone of the event. And I just snapped, "Mom." I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who would exclude his own mother to please people who measured worth in designer labels and country club memberships. He looked up at me then, tears streaming down his face. I left. I walked out of my own wedding reception. Jessica is furious. Her parents are threatening to sue me for the wedding costs. But I had to come here. I had to tell you I'm sorry. I stood there looking at my son, this grown man crying on my couch, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that he'd finally seen the truth, anger that it had taken public humiliation to open his eyes, sadness that we'd reached this point at all, and underneath it all, a deep weariness. "Marcus," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "I appreciate you coming here. I really do. But an apology doesn't erase what happened. You didn't just uninvite me to your wedding. You chose someone else's comfort over your own mother's dignity. You let someone convince you I was an embarrassment. Do you understand how much that hurt?" Marcus nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand like a little boy. "I know, Mom. I know I can't take it back. But I want to make it right somehow. I want to fix this." I sat down in my armchair, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. Some things can't be fixed, honey. They can only be lived with and learned from. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, filling the silence between us. I could see he was expecting me to forgive him immediately, to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay, like I did when he was small. But I wasn't that person anymore. And this wasn't a scraped knee or a failed test. "What are you going to do about Jessica?" I asked, changing the subject because I wasn't ready to offer the absolution he was seeking. He shook his head miserably. "I don't know. The marriage is legal, we signed the papers, but I can't stay with someone who made me choose between her and my own mother. Someone who looks down on people because they don't have money or status. I thought I loved her, but maybe I just loved the idea of the life she represented." It was a mature observation, maybe the most mature thing I'd heard him say in years. We sat in my small living room for another hour, talking in circles about the wedding, about Jessica, about the past few years. Marcus explained how gradually he'd been pulled into her world, how the subtle comments about my house being quaint and my job being simple had accumulated until he started seeing me through her judgmental eyes. "She never said anything directly cruel," he explained. "It was always small things. Suggesting we meet at restaurants instead of here, changing the subject when I mentioned you, making jokes about blue-collar work that she claimed were harmless, but made me self-conscious about where I came from." I listened without interrupting, and I could see the pattern clearly. Classic manipulation, slow and steady, rewriting his perception of reality until he believed the problem was me, not her prejudice. "Marcus, do you remember the summer you were 15? I asked suddenly. He looked confused by the change in topic. "Which summer?" he asked. "The summer I worked 3 jobs so you could go to that debate camp in Washington, D.C., the one that cost $2,000. I cleaned houses in the morning, worked my regular custodian shift in the afternoon, and cashiered at the grocery store at night. I was so exhausted I fell asleep standing up once, actually collapsed right there in the cereal aisle." His face crumpled with fresh tears. "Mom, I remember. You told me you'd picked up some extra hours, but I didn't know it was 3 jobs. I didn't know you were killing yourself for that camp." I nodded slowly. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted you to go and have that experience without guilt, without feeling like a burden, because that's what parents do. We sacrifice without keeping score. But Marcus, there comes a point where love has to be mutual, where the person you've sacrificed for needs to stand up for you, needs to see your worth even when others don't." The conversation eventually wound down, both of us exhausted. Marcus asked if he could stay, if he could sleep in his old room that I'd kept mostly unchanged, still decorated with his high school baseball trophies and the faded posters he'd loved. I hesitated, then agreed, but with conditions. "You can stay tonight because you're clearly in no shape to drive. But tomorrow we need to talk about boundaries, about what happens next. This isn't going to be like old times where you drift in and out of my life depending on what's convenient." He nodded gratefully, understanding that forgiveness wasn't automatic, that trust once broken takes time to rebuild. That night I lay in my bed listening to the sound of Marcus moving around in his old room, and I felt a strange mix of comfort and pain. Comfort because my child was under my roof again. Pain because of everything that had led to this moment. I thought about Jessica, probably furious in whatever hotel room she'd ended up in. I thought about her family, likely planning their next move. I thought about the mess Marcus had created by walking out of his own reception, and I wondered if his sudden clarity would last, or if this was just a temporary rebellion that would fade once the initial shock wore off. Monday morning arrived too soon. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, just like old times. Marcus came to the kitchen looking rumpled but more composed than the previous day. We ate in awkward silence for a while before he spoke. I need to go back to my apartment today, face the music with Jessica. But Mom, I meant what I said yesterday. I'm not going to let her control my relationship with you anymore. I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that my son had truly changed. But another part, the part that had been hurt too deeply, remained skeptical. Actions speak louder than words, Marcus, I said gently but firmly. You can make all the promises you want, but what matters is what you actually do in the days and weeks ahead. When Jessica cries and apologizes and promises she'll try harder with me, when her family pressures you to make it work because of the money already spent, when your friends tell you that you overreacted, what will you do then? He met my eyes with a determination I hadn't seen in years. I'll remember this conversation. I'll remember how close I came to losing you forever. And I'll choose differently. I hoped he was right. I really did. After Marcus left, I sat in my quiet house and took stock of everything that had happened. In the span of less than a week, I'd gone from being excluded from my son's wedding to having him show up on my doorstep full of regrets. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. I picked up my phone, still with Marcus's number blocked, and stared at it for a long moment before unblocking him. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was choosing to leave the door open for possibility, for change, for healing, however slow it might be. The following days were strange. Marcus called every evening just to talk, something he hadn't done in over a year. He told me about his conversations with Jessica, how she'd initially refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, how she'd blamed him for embarrassing her in front of everyone. She keeps saying I'm being dramatic, that you're too sensitive, that every family has tension, he explained during one call. But I'm not backing down, Mom. I told her that until she can genuinely respect you and apologize for how she's treated you, I can't move forward with this marriage. I was proud of him for standing firm, but I also knew how hard it was to untangle yourself from someone you'd built a life with. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, Marcus showed up at my door again, this time during daylight hours and with prior notice. He looked different somehow, lighter maybe, like he'd been carrying a weight he'd finally set down. Mom, I need to tell you something, he said as we sat in my living room with coffee. I filed for an annulment. It's not going to be easy or cheap, but I can't stay married to someone who fundamentally doesn't share my values. Jessica and I are from different worlds, and I was so busy trying to fit into hers that I abandoned my own. I felt a complicated rush of emotions, satisfaction that he'd made the choice to stand up for himself and for our relationship, concern about the legal and financial mess he was walking into, and a strange sadness for the future he'd been imagining that was now gone. Are you sure about this, Marcus? Marriage is a serious commitment. I don't want you making rash decisions because of what happened with me. He shook his head firmly. It's not rash, Mom. It's the clearest I've seen in years. Jessica and I want fundamentally different things. She wants status and appearances. I want authenticity and family. Those two things don't always have to be opposed, but in our case, they were. What do you think about Marcus's decision? Was he right to file for annulment so quickly, or should he have tried harder to make it work? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious what you all think about this. And if you're still following this story, go ahead and hit that like button because we're just getting to the good part. Over the next month, I watched Marcus navigate the messy process of ending a marriage that had barely begun. Jessica's family hired an aggressive attorney who tried to claim Marcus owed them for the entire cost of the wedding, nearly $80,000 for what they called breach of contract. Marcus's own lawyer argued that you can't contract someone into a marriage, that the annulment was legal and justified. The whole thing was ugly in public, with Jessica's mother calling me directly one day to scream about how I'd ruined her daughter's life. Mrs. Patterson, I hope you're proud of yourself, she'd hissed over the phone. You've turned your son against his wife, destroyed a beautiful union, all because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention for one day. I'd listened calmly, let her spew all her venom, and then responded in a level tone. Mrs. Carmichael, with all due respect, if your daughter's marriage couldn't survive one honest conversation about respect and family values, then it wasn't much of a marriage to begin with. I didn't turn Marcus against anyone. I simply existed as his mother, and apparently that was too much for your family to handle. She'd hung up on me, which was fine. I was done being anyone's scapegoat. The truth was, Jessica's family had been so focused on creating the perfect social event that they'd forgotten the purpose of a wedding was to celebrate love and commitment, not to show off wealth and status. And Marcus had gotten caught up in that superficial world until reality came crashing down. I didn't take pleasure in their distress, but I wasn't going to apologize for expecting basic respect either. As the annulment process dragged on through lawyers and paperwork, Marcus and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't instant or magical. There were awkward moments, conversations that hit painful topics, times when I had to remind myself to be patient with the healing process. But there were also good moments. Sunday dinners resumed, with Marcus showing up with groceries and cooking for me like he used to in college. Movie nights where we'd watch old films and laugh at the terrible special effects. Simple moments that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep him in my life. One evening about 6 weeks after the wedding, Marcus brought over a box of old photos he'd found in his apartment. We spread them across my kitchen table, sorting through memories frozen in time. Marcus, as a toddler covered in spaghetti sauce. His first day of kindergarten with his too big backpack. Middle school graduation, where he'd been so proud of his perfect attendance award. "I forgot how much you were always there," he said quietly, holding a photo of the two of us at his high school baseball game. Game, every concert, every parent-teacher conference. You never missed anything. "That's what parents do," I said simply. "We show up." He nodded, but I could see tears in his eyes. Jessica used to say that showing up wasn't enough, that it was about quality time and intentional experiences. But looking at these photos, I realized showing up is everything. It's the foundation. All those fancy vacations and expensive gifts her family valued, they don't mean anything if you're not actually present in someone's life. It was another sign of growth, of him developing a more mature understanding of what really mattered in relationships. The annulment finally went through in late summer, about 4 months after the wedding. The judge ruled in Marcus's favor, determining that the marriage had been entered into under false pretenses, given Jessica's deception about her willingness to accept Marcus's family. The Carmichaels were furious, but there was nothing more they could do legally. Marcus was officially single again, 32 years old and starting over. "How do you feel?" I asked him when he called with the news. "Relieved," he said without hesitation, and honestly, a little embarrassed that it took me so long to see the truth, but mostly relieved. We celebrated quietly that weekend, just the two of us at a small Italian restaurant in our neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Over spaghetti and garlic bread, Marcus raised his glass of cheap red wine and made a toast. To new beginnings, to honesty, and to the woman who raised me right even when I forgot those lessons. I clinked my glass against his, feeling something shift in my chest. Not complete healing, not yet, but the beginning of it. The possibility that maybe we could move forward from this painful chapter. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 weeks after the annulment was finalized, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a woman's voice I didn't recognize said, "Mrs. Patterson, my name is Amanda Pierce. I'm a friend of Jessica's, and I think you need to know something about what's been happening." My stomach dropped. What now, I thought. What fresh drama was coming our way? Amanda explained that she'd been Jessica's college roommate, someone who'd known her for over a decade. "I need to meet with you in person," she insisted. "There are things about Jessica that Marcus doesn't know, things that explain a lot about why she acted the way she did toward you." I was hesitant, unsure if I wanted to dig deeper into this mess, but curiosity won out. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. I didn't tell Marcus about the call. Something told me I needed to hear what Amanda had to say first before deciding if it was information worth sharing. Amanda turned out to be a pleasant woman in her early 30s, professionally dressed with kind eyes that seemed genuinely concerned. We ordered coffee and settled into a corner booth where we could talk privately. "First, I want you to know I'm not here to defend Jessica," she started. "What she did to you and Marcus was wrong, but I think understanding her background might help explain, if not excuse, her behavior." She went on to tell me about Jessica's upbringing, how her parents had built their wealth from nothing and were obsessively focused on social climbing and maintaining appearances. Jessica grew up in a home where love was conditional on achievement, Amanda explained. Every accomplishment was measured against what it did for the family's reputation. She was never good enough unless she was the best, had the most, appeared the most successful. Her parents literally had a chart tracking her social status compared to her peers. I listened, feeling an unexpected twinge of sympathy. It didn't excuse Jessica's cruelty, but it contextualized it. She'd been raised in a toxic environment where people were valued for what they represented, not who they were. Amanda continued, telling me about specific incidents from Jessica's past. How her mother had once made her return a prom date because his family wasn't established enough. How her father had cut off a cousin who'd married a school teacher. The Carmichaels see people as assets or liabilities, Amanda said sadly. And in their calculation, you were a liability. A reminder that Marcus came from humble beginnings, which threatened the narrative they were trying to build about their daughter marrying into legal profession success. It was all so calculated, so cold, and yet somehow knowing this made me feel less personally attacked. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Amanda directly. She sighed, stirring her coffee absently. "Because Jessica called me last week, absolutely falling apart. The annulment has devastated her, not just because of the embarrassment, but because it's the first time in her life that her parents' formula for success didn't work. She's starting to question everything she was taught, and I think there might be a chance for her to grow from this. But that can only happen if the people she hurt understand that her cruelty came from her own pain, not from any real deficiency in you or Marcus." I sat with Amanda's words for a long moment, processing this new information. Part of me wanted to reject it, to hold on to my righteous anger at how Jessica had treated me. But another part, the part that had spent decades as a mother understanding that hurt people often hurt others, felt a softening. "Does Marcus know any of this?" I asked. Amanda shook her head. Jessica would never admit her family's dysfunction to him. She's too proud, too invested in maintaining the perfect image. But I thought you should know, because you seem like the kind of person who might be able to help them both move forward, even if they don't end up together. After Amanda left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, thinking about everything she'd told me. I thought about my own parenting, how I'd tried so hard to raise Marcus with love and acceptance, to value character over status. I thought about the Carmichael family with their charts and calculations, creating a daughter so wounded that she couldn't recognize genuine love when she found it. And I thought about whether any of this information changed anything. Did knowing Jessica's background excuse her behavior toward me? No. But did it help me understand it? Maybe. I decided not to tell Marcus about my meeting with Amanda, at least not immediately. He was healing, rebuilding his life, and I didn't want to complicate that process by introducing sympathy for his ex-wife. But I filed the information away, thinking that perhaps someday it might be relevant. For now, my focus was on continuing to strengthen my relationship with my son and on taking care of myself, something I'd neglected for too long while trying to win approval from people who would never offer it. The months that followed were peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Marcus and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. He'd come over for dinner twice a week, we'd talk on the phone regularly, and he'd started including me in his life again. Not as an obligation or an afterthought, but as a genuine priority. He introduced me to his work friends, brought me to office events, made it clear to anyone new he met that his mother was important to him. It was everything I'd wanted, and it had only come after almost losing him completely. One Saturday in early fall, Marcus showed up at my house with an unusual request. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about the wedding, the annulment, rebuilding our relationship. And I realized I never properly apologized for the actual message, the one that started all this." He pulled out his phone and showed me the text he'd sent months ago, the one that had shattered me. "I want you to know that I didn't mean a single word. Jessica dictated it to me, and I was too weak to stand up to her. That's not an excuse, just the truth. And I'm so, so sorry." I looked at those words again, words I'd read 100 times in the days after receiving them. But now, with months of healing behind us, they had less power to hurt me. "Marcus, I appreciate the apology," I said slowly. "But you need to understand something. Those words did damage that can't be completely undone. I forgive you because I love you and because I believe you've genuinely changed. But I'll never forget how it felt to read that message, to know my own son valued a girlfriend's opinion over decades of motherhood. That stays with me." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know, Mom. I know I can't take it back. But I promise you, for the rest of my life, I'm going to make sure you know how much you matter. Not through big gestures or expensive gifts, but through consistency. Through showing up, like you always did for me." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Not empty promises of perfection, but a commitment to doing better, to being present. That evening we cooked dinner together, Marcus making his grandmother's recipe for pot roast that I'd taught him years ago. As we worked side by side in my small kitchen, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. Thanksgiving approached, our first holiday since the wedding disaster. Marcus asked what I wanted to do, offering to take me to a nice restaurant or to host at his apartment, but I suggested something different. Let's volunteer at the community shelter like I did on your wedding day. Let's serve people who actually need help and be grateful for what we have. He agreed immediately, and we spent Thanksgiving morning serving turkey and stuffing to homeless families, veterans, and people struggling through hard times. It was humbling and grounding, a reminder of what really mattered in life. During our break, as we sat outside the shelter eating our own plates of holiday food, Marcus turned to me with a serious expression. Mom, I met someone. It's very new, nothing serious yet, but I wanted you to hear it from me. My heart skipped a beat, worried that we were about to repeat the Jessica situation. Tell me about her, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. He smiled softly. Her name is Rachel. She's a public defender. We met at a legal aid clinic where I've been volunteering. She's smart, passionate about justice, and she asked about you on our first coffee date. Actually asked, genuinely wanted to know about my family. I felt a wave of relief. That sounds promising. What did you tell her? Marcus laughed. I told her the truth, that my mother is the strongest, most selfless person I know, that I almost lost her because I was an idiot, and that anyone who wants to be in my life needs to understand that you're part of the package, non-negotiable. It was music to my ears, not because I needed to be the center of his life, but because he'd finally learned to value the right things, to see through superficial charm and recognize genuine character. I'd like to meet her, I said carefully. When you're both ready, no pressure. Just a casual dinner here at the house. Marcus beamed. She suggested the same thing. She said she always judges people by their relationship with their mothers, and she wants to meet the woman who raised me. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about Marcus's romantic future. Maybe this time he'd found someone who understood that love means accepting the whole person, including their family, their history, their roots. Rachel and I met 2 weeks later. She showed up at my door with a homemade apple pie and a genuine smile. Within 5 minutes of conversation, I could tell she was different from Jessica in every meaningful way. She asked about my work as a custodian with real interest, wanted to hear stories about raising Marcus alone, complimented my modest home without any hint of judgment. Over dinner, she talked about her own background, growing up in a working-class family in rural Montana, putting herself through law school with loans and scholarships. She understood struggle, respected hard work, valued authenticity over appearances. As the evening progressed, I watched Marcus with Rachel and saw something I'd never seen with Jessica. Ease. He wasn't trying to impress her or present a polished version of himself. He was just Marcus, my son, telling embarrassing childhood stories and laughing at himself. Rachel listened and engaged, asking me follow-up questions, making sure I felt included in the conversation. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, Marcus leaned over and whispered, "What do you think?" I squeezed his hand. "I think she's wonderful. But more importantly, I think you're wonderful with her. You're yourself. That's all I ever wanted for you." After Rachel left, Marcus stayed to help with dishes. As we worked together, he said something that surprised me. "Mom, I ran into Jessica last week. She called out to me on the street." I paused mid-rinse. "How did that go?" He shrugged. It was brief. She apologized, actually said the words, "I'm sorry." She said she's been in therapy, dealing with some family issues, trying to understand why she sabotages good things. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that ship had sailed. We're different people who want different lives, and the annulment was the right choice for both of us. I was impressed by his maturity, his ability to acknowledge her apology without reopening a closed door. "How did she take that?" I asked. Marcus smiled sadly. "Better than I expected. She said she understood, that she hoped I was happy, and that she was sorry for how she treated you. Then she walked away. It felt like closure, you know? Like we both finally understood that some relationships are meant to teach us lessons, not last forever." It was a wise observation, one that showed how much he'd grown through this difficult experience. Christmas that year was simple and perfect. Marcus, Rachel, and I decorated my small tree together, drank hot chocolate, and watched classic holiday movies. Rachel fit into our little family seamlessly, never trying to replace anyone or change dynamics, just adding her own warmth to what was already there. On Christmas morning, Marcus gave me a gift that made me cry. It was a photo album he'd created, filled with pictures spanning his entire childhood. Each page had a caption he'd written, little memories and thank yous for specific moments. The time you stayed up all night sewing my costume for the school play. The morning you drove me to baseball practice at 5 a.m. even though you'd worked until midnight. The last page of the album had a recent photo of the two of us from Thanksgiving at the shelter, both wearing aprons and smiling. Under it, Marcus had written, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. And thank you for raising me to value character over status. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember those lessons, but I promise I'll never forget them again. Love, your son." I held that album to my chest and let myself cry. Not tears of pain this time, but tears of relief and gratitude that we'd made it through the darkness back to each other. New Year's Eve found us back at my house, a small celebration with Marcus, Rachel, and a few of my friends from church and the community shelter. As midnight approached, Marcus asked if he could make a toast. "This year taught me a lot about what matters in life," he began, his arm around Rachel, his eyes on me. "I almost lost the most important person in my world because I was too busy chasing an image of success instead of appreciating what I already had. Mom, you taught me about sacrifice, about integrity, about loving people for who they are, not what they can do for you. I forgot those lessons for a while, but I'm back, and I promise, I'm not going anywhere again." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a fullness in my heart I hadn't experienced in years. Not because everything was perfect, we still had wounds that would take time to fully heal, but because we were on the right path. Marcus had learned that real love accepts you completely, messy history and all. He'd learned that status is hollow without substance. He'd learned that sometimes you have to lose something to understand its value. And I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing hope over bitterness, connection over isolation. The new year brought unexpected developments. In February, I received a letter in the mail from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I found a handwritten note from Jessica. "Dear Mrs. Patterson," it began, "I'm writing to apologize, truly and completely, for how I treated you. There's no excuse for my behavior. My therapist has helped me understand that I projected my own insecurities and my parents' toxic values onto you and Marcus. You were never the problem. My inability to see worth beyond wealth and status was the problem. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see clearly now what I couldn't see before. You are exactly the kind of mother I wish I'd had. Sincerely, Jessica." I read the letter several times, surprised by its sincerity. There was no manipulation in the words, no hidden agenda, just straightforward accountability and remorse. I showed it to Marcus during our next Sunday dinner. He read it quietly, then handed it back. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. I thought for a moment. Honestly, I feel sad for her. Sad that she was raised in an environment that warped her understanding of love and value. But I also feel at peace. Her apology doesn't change what happened, but it does confirm that our pain wasn't meaningless. Maybe it was the catalyst for her to get help and change. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think you'll respond?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. Some apologies are meant to be received and acknowledged internally, not continued into new relationship. Jessica needs to heal on her own path, and we need to continue on ours. They're separate journeys now." He smiled at that, proud of my wisdom, I think. Or maybe just relieved that I wasn't holding on to anger that would poison my own life. Either way, I tucked Jessica's letter into a drawer and let it go, choosing to focus on the present rather than dwelling on past hurts. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. Marcus and Rachel's relationship deepened, and I could see marriage on the horizon, though neither of them was rushing. They'd both learned from past mistakes about the importance of strong foundations. Rachel had become a regular fixture in my life, stopping by even when Marcus was busy, bringing groceries, helping with yard work, just spending time together. She never tried too hard or made a show of her affection for me. It was natural and easy, the way family relationships should be. One April afternoon, Rachel and I were planting flowers in my front garden when she said something that touched me deeply. "Nicole, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're kind of the mother I always wished I had." I looked up from the soil, surprised. "What do you mean? You've talked about your mother before. She sounds wonderful." Rachel smiled, but there was sadness in it. "She is wonderful in her own way. She's tough and practical and taught me to work hard, but she's not warm. She doesn't really do emotions or deep conversations. When Marcus talks about how you supported him, how you showed up for every little thing, I feel envious. My mom loved me, but she didn't really see me." I put down my trowel and gave Rachel my full attention. Parents do the best they can with the tools they have. Your mother gave you what she knew how to give. But Rachel, you're always welcome here. You're family now, whether you and Marcus get married or not. You've earned that through who you are, not through any official status. Her eyes filled with tears and she hugged me right there in the dirt, two women creating the family bonds they both needed. That moment felt as significant as any biological connection, proof that family is about choice and commitment as much as blue. By summer, Marcus had saved enough money to move out of his cramped apartment into a small house with a yard. Nothing fancy, a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, but it felt like a fresh start. Rachel and I helped him move, spending a Saturday hauling boxes and assembling furniture. As we worked, I noticed how they functioned as a team, communicating easily, supporting each other without drama or power struggles. This was what healthy partnership looked like, so different from the toxic dynamic I'd witnessed between Marcus and Jessica. During a break, sitting on Marcus's new back porch with lemonade, Rachel mentioned something interesting. My firm is starting a program to provide free legal services to low-income families. Marcus suggested you might know people from the shelter who could benefit. I felt a surge of pride at Marcus's thoughtfulness. Absolutely. There are so many people struggling with landlord issues, custody battles, immigration paperwork. They need help but can't afford attorneys. Rachel nodded enthusiastically. Would you be willing to help us connect with them? Maybe coordinate referrals from the shelter? It felt good to be included, to have my knowledge and connections valued. That summer was one of the happiest I could remember. Simple pleasures like garden parties at Marcus's new house, movie nights with Rachel, volunteering together at the shelter. No drama, no manipulation, no walking on eggshells wondering if I was good enough. Just genuine relationships built on mutual respect and affection. I'd gone through hell to get here, nearly lost my son completely, but somehow we'd found our way back to something even stronger than before. The pain had been terrible, but it had burned away the superficial and left only what was real. In August, Marcus called me with news I'd been half expecting. Mom, I'm going to propose to Rachel. I wanted to tell you first. Get your blessing before I did anything. My heart soared. Marcus, you don't need my blessing, but you absolutely have it. She's wonderful. You're wonderful together. Have you bought a ring? He laughed. That's the thing. I was thinking about Grandma's ring, the one you've been saving. Would you be willing to let me use it? My mother's engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, had been in my jewelry box for years. I'd always hoped Marcus would want it someday. I would be honored for Rachel to have that ring, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Your grandmother would have loved her. She always said the best marriages are built on friendship and respect, not just passion. You and Rachel have that foundation. We made plans for him to come pick up the ring that weekend. When he arrived, I had it cleaned and polished, sitting in its original velvet box. Marcus held it carefully, his eyes misty. Tell me again how Grandpa proposed to Grandma, he asked, even though he'd heard the story a dozen times growing up. I smiled at the memory. Your grandfather was a mechanic, didn't have much money. He saved for 6 months to buy that ring from a pawn shop. He proposed in their apartment, no fancy restaurant or elaborate plan. He just looked at her after dinner one night and said, I want to spend every ordinary day for the rest of my life with you. She said that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, because he wasn't promising excitement or luxury. He was promising presence and partnership through the mundane moments that make up most of life. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the weight of that story. That's what I want with Rachel. Not some fairy tale, but a real partnership through all the ordinary days. He tucked the ring box carefully into his jacket pocket. I'm thinking of proposing next month on the anniversary of when we met at the legal aid clinic. Full circle, you know? It was perfect, meaningful, without being overdone. Everything about Marcus's relationship with Rachel felt intentional and grounded in reality, such a stark contrast to the performative relationship he'd had with Jessica. September arrived with cooler temperatures and changing leaves. Marcus took Rachel to the legal aid clinic where they'd first met, supposedly to drop off some files. But he'd arranged with the staff to have the conference room decorated with photos of their relationship over the past year. When Rachel walked in and saw the pictures, Marcus got down on one knee and proposed with my mother's ring. She said yes immediately, laughing and crying at the same time. They called me right after, both talking over each other in their excitement, and I felt pure joy for them. This was how it was supposed to feel, celebrating love without reservations or concerns. The engagement party was held at Marcus's house, a casual backyard gathering with close friends and family. Rachel's parents drove in from Montana, salt-of-the-earth people who greeted me with warm hugs and genuine appreciation. Nicole, we've heard so much about you, Rachel's mother said. Thank you for raising such a good man, and for welcoming our daughter so completely. It was such a contrast to my interactions with the Carmichael family, where every word felt calculated and conditional. These were real people who valued character and kindness over status symbols. During the party, I found myself talking with Rachel's father about his work as a high school teacher. He spoke passionately about his students, especially the ones from difficult backgrounds who reminded him why education mattered. Young people need someone to believe in them, he said. Sometimes they don't get that at home, so we teachers have to fill that gap. I thought about my own role at the school where I'd worked, how I'd tried to be that steady presence for kids who needed it. Maybe custodians and teachers weren't so different in that way, both showing up daily to create safe spaces for children to learn and grow. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Marcus pulled me aside. Mom, Rachel and I were talking, and we want to keep the wedding simple. Maybe 50 people max, ceremony in my backyard or at the community center. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just the people who really matter celebrating with us. I squeezed his hand, proud of how far he'd come from the man who'd been willing to exclude his own mother for a lavish country club wedding. That sounds perfect. What can I do to help? He smiled. Just be there. That's all we need. The next few months flew by in wedding preparations. Unlike the Jessica wedding planning that had excluded me completely, this time I was involved in every decision. Rachel asked my opinion on flowers, on menu choices, on music. Not because she needed my approval, but because she genuinely wanted my input and valued my perspective. We spent afternoons addressing invitations together, evenings making centerpieces from mason jars and wildflowers. It was the experience I dreamed of having with Marcus's first wedding, and it felt bittersweet knowing I'd almost missed this entirely. One afternoon while working on decorations, Rachel asked me something unexpected. Nicole, would you do a reading at the ceremony? Something about mothers and sons, about family? I was surprised and touched. Are you sure? What about your own mother? Rachel smiled gently. My mom is doing a reading too. But Nicole, you've become such an important part of my life. This wedding is about joining our families, and I want to honor that publicly. You've shown me what maternal love looks like, how it gives without keeping score. That's something I want to carry forward when Marcus and I have our own kids someday. The mention of future grandchildren made my heart skip. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead, afraid to jinx the happiness I'd found. But hearing Rachel talk so naturally about building a life with Marcus, about including me in that future, it filled me with hope. I would be honored to do a reading, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for including me, for seeing me as family. Rachel hugged me tight. You are family, Nicole. Not because you have to be, but because we choose it. That's the best kind. The wedding day arrived in early December, a crisp Saturday with clear blue skies. Marcus's backyard had been transformed with string lights and heaters, simple white chairs arranged in rows facing a wooden arch decorated with pine branches and white flowers. It was beautiful in its simplicity, elegant without being pretentious. I arrived early to help with final preparations, wearing a dress Rachel had helped me pick out, nothing expensive but lovely and appropriate. As I worked, I thought about the contrast between this day and the country club wedding that never happened. This felt real and grounded, celebrating genuine love rather than putting on a show. The ceremony itself was short and heartfelt. Marcus and Rachel had written their own vows, promising partnership and presence through both extraordinary and ordinary moments. When it came time for my reading, I stood before the small gathering and read the piece Rachel and I had chosen together, a poem about how love multiplies rather than divides, how welcoming someone new into your family doesn't diminish existing bonds, but strengthens them. My voice cracked slightly as I read the final lines, but I made it through, looking at Marcus and Rachel with tears of joy streaming down my face. After the ceremony, during the simple reception with its potluck dinner and dancing to a playlist Marcus had created, I found myself standing at the edge of the celebration watching everyone I loved having a wonderful time. Rachel's father was teaching Marcus's work friends how to line dance. Dorothy from church was deep in conversation with Rachel's mother about their shared love of quilting. Marcus and Rachel were in the center of it all, laughing and dancing without a care in the world. This was what family was supposed to feel like, I thought. Warm and inclusive and real. Marcus found me standing there and pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor. Dance with me, Mom, he said, and we swayed to a slow song as other couples joined around us. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to, for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it, for being here today. I held my son close and let myself feel the full weight of gratitude that we'd survived the darkness and found our way back to this moment. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, I told him honestly. Later that evening, As the party wound down and guests helped clean up, Rachel came to sit beside me. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with 3 charms: a heart, a key, and a tiny house. "The heart is for love," Rachel explained. "The key is because you opened the door and welcomed me into your family. And the house is because you've given us both a foundation of what home really means. Thank you, Nicole, for raising Marcus right, and for showing me what it means to love without conditions." I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, knowing I'd wear it every day for the rest of my life. As I hugged Rachel, now officially my daughter-in-law, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of that text message from Marcus, the heartbreak of being excluded, the long road of rebuilding trust. All of it had been necessary somehow, burning away the superficial to reveal what was truly valuable. I'd almost lost everything, but in the process, I'd gained something even more precious: authentic relationships built on genuine love and mutual respect. The months following the wedding brought a comfortable new rhythm to our family life. Marcus and Rachel settled into married life with surprising ease. No dramatic adjustments or conflicts, just 2 people who genuinely liked each other navigating daily life together. They had me over for dinner every Sunday, a tradition Rachel insisted on establishing. "Family dinner night," she called it, making it clear I was central to their new family unit, not an obligation, but a cherished part of their week. In March, Rachel called me with news that made my heart soar. "Nicole, I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, overwhelmed with emotion. After everything we'd been through, after coming so close to losing Marcus entirely, now I was being given this incredible gift. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. How are you feeling? When are you due?" We talked for over an hour about her symptoms, her excitement, her nervousness. She asked if I'd be willing to be in the delivery room when the time came, and I agreed through tears of joy. The pregnancy brought us even closer. I went with Rachel to doctor appointments when Marcus had court dates he couldn't miss. We shopped for baby items together, spent afternoons planning the nursery. Rachel asked endless questions about my experience raising Marcus as a single mother, genuinely interested in learning from my journey. "You made it look easy," she said once. But I know it couldn't have been. I told her the truth, that it had been exhausting and scary and sometimes lonely, but also the most meaningful thing I'd ever done. "You won't be alone, though," I assured her. "You have Marcus, and you have me. We'll figure it out together." One afternoon, while folding tiny baby clothes, Rachel said something that brought up old pain. "I saw Jessica the other day. At the courthouse, she was there for a hearing. She's engaged again to someone from her parents' social circle. She looked, I don't know, polished but empty somehow." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated that Jessica had returned to the shallow world she'd come from, but another part felt sad that she apparently hadn't learned from her mistakes, that she was repeating the same patterns that had destroyed her marriage to Marcus. "Some people grow from their pain, and others just seek familiar comfort," I said carefully. "Jessica apologized to me in a letter months ago, and I believe she meant it at the time. But changing deep patterns is hard, especially when your whole family reinforces the old ways. I hope she finds happiness. I really do. But I'm grateful her path diverged from ours." Rachel nodded, resting her hand on her growing belly. "Me too. Because if things had worked out with Jessica, Marcus and I never would have met, and this baby wouldn't exist. It's strange how life works out." Summer arrived with its long, warm days. Rachel's due date approached, and our whole family was on edge with anticipation. When the contractions finally started on a humid July evening, Marcus called me immediately. I met them at the hospital, and true to her word, Rachel wanted me in the delivery room alongside Marcus. The birth was long and difficult, 14 hours of labor that tested everyone's endurance. But when my grandson finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, I felt something shift in the universe. This tiny human represented hope and new beginnings, and the continuation of our family story. They named him Daniel, after my late father. Marcus held him carefully, this big man cradling this tiny infant, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Mom, come hold your grandson," he said, and I took Daniel in my arms for the first time. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with Marcus's nose and Rachel's chin. As I held him, I thought about all the moments I'd almost missed. If I'd given in to Marcus's original message and quietly accepted being excluded. If I'd enabled his relationship with Jessica rather than standing firm in my boundaries. I would never have gotten to this moment, holding this precious child who carried my family's legacy forward. The first few weeks with a newborn were chaotic and exhausting, even with 3 adults sharing the load. I spent most days at Marcus and Rachel's house, helping with laundry and meals, holding Daniel so they could shower or nap. It reminded me of those early days raising Marcus alone, except this time I had partners in the journey. We were a team, supporting each other through the sleepless nights and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a helpless infant. Rachel would often thank me for my help, but I told her the truth. This isn't a favor. This is family. We show up for each other. One quiet afternoon, I sat in the nursery rocking Daniel while he slept, and I reflected on the entire journey that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, I'd received a text message that shattered my heart. My son had told me I wasn't wanted at his wedding, that my presence would ruin everything. I'd nearly lost him completely to a toxic relationship built on superficial values. But I'd stood firm in my boundaries, refused to be diminished, and waited for him to find his way back to what mattered. The path had been painful, filled with hurt and uncertainty. But it had led here to this nursery, to this sleeping baby, to a family rebuilt on genuine love and respect. As Daniel stirred in my arms, opening his eyes and looking up at me with that unfocused newborn gaze, I whispered promises to him, that I would always show up for him like I'd shown up for his father, that I would teach him to value character over status, authenticity over appearance, that I would love him unconditionally while also holding him accountable to be a good person, and that I would tell him the story of how our family nearly fell apart but found its way back together, so he'd understand that relationships worth having are worth fighting for. Looking back on everything now, I realized that the text message that almost destroyed me actually saved me in a way. It forced me to set boundaries I should have established earlier. It taught Marcus lessons about values and priorities that he needed to learn. And it cleared the path for Rachel to enter our lives, bringing the love and respect our family needed. Sometimes the worst moments become the turning points that lead to the best outcomes, if we have the courage to stand firm and the wisdom to forgive when genuine change occurs. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Thank you for listening to an old woman share her journey through heartbreak and healing. I'm curious about your own experiences. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members you love? Have you watched someone you care about get pulled into a toxic relationship? How did you handle it? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help me feel less alone in this complicated business of being human. And listen, if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family relationships, or gave you hope that broken bonds can be repaired, do me a favor. Hit that like button so I know this story connected with you. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe someone struggling with family dynamics or trying to figure out how to set healthy boundaries. And subscribe to this channel because I've got more stories to share. Stories about life and family and the messy, beautiful process of learning to love well. Remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who fights for the relationship when things get hard. And sometimes, the strongest act of love is refusing to accept less than you deserve, holding firm until the other person grows enough to meet you where you are. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect. And it's the foundation of any healthy relationship. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who matter to you.